Thank you very much for the CITCEM for organizing this event. Thank you very much, especially to the organizer, Evaristo, also George Ribeiro and Joanna, and also my colleagues that are there. It's an honor to share with you this panel. I'm going to speak you about affections, sociability, and religiosity to create the image of the enemy and motherland among the Spanish prisoners in France between 1808 and 1915. Why? Because this image that you are going to see was completely hidden. It was not allowed to speak about these situations, this situation of prisoners, until 1915 because of patriotic meanings. What I'm going to speak you, what we are going to have is what I've called a sentimental journey. Why? Because it began with hate speech in the war against Napoleon, against the invaders, and they went to Zaragoza siege, where they were defeated in 1809. And then since they were led with 10,000 prisoners to France, from Zaragoza to France, since they were led, it changed the image after they passed through the Pyrenees mountains. Why? Because they began to have some, this post, POW began to have some relationship with French people, but this is going to be very strong in Nancy in the 4 years they spent as prisoners on parole. On the beginning, we will see that they were led to a caserne with some other European prisoners, and afterwards they were sent to Quebec when Napoleon was losing the war in 1814, and they escaped. But the French people even risked their lives to have them, to hear them, or to help them. Who am I speaking about? I'm going to speak about a group of teachers of the Royal Academy of Engineers of Alcalá de Henares, but the contents of what this happened is very related to the situation of another teachers and maybe more sub-elites of these engineers and equivalent groups, professional groups. Well, those engineers were raised up against their king, against Ferdinand VII, because it was an alliance with Napoleon that allowed the troops to enter to invade Portugal in the treaties of Fontainebleau. But what people made was to rise up in arms against the invaders. And they were defeated, as I've already remembered. They were organized with leaders that make discourses, that as el empecinado or José de Palafox y Melfi, that were their discourses were very clear, defining the enemy. So in times of war was so the concept of what was the enemy, it was very, very clear. They will never think how it was going to change when they will arrive to Nancy. Well, they went to this city that since the 17th century was a fortified city, and it has several casernes. Those military engineers went to this caserne with another European prisoners, as José María Román remembers in its memories. And the image is going to be positive, as another recordings that POWs have good memories in several cases, of course. Why? In part because they can live on that city. They live in the city, they go into the houses and they ask for a job, etc. And they have a strong sociability with the citizens, with the French citizens. Well, this positive vision, I'm very, in my situation, I consider that it's very clear that I have this positive vision because of the sources I'm using. This is, attention, this is a private diary of 4 years, and the contents are going to be hidden too as those memories. Why? Because it was after when Napoleon was defeated and the royal kings came back into Europe, this vision was absolutely forbidden. So the power didn't allow to tell what that people could tell to their private diary. I have contrasted this image, of course, with many other documents, official documents, that never speak about this situation. Sometimes I can find to contrast and that allow me to say that it was true what they were saying about that alliance with the citizens of France. Well, my point is that I follow the theories of history of feelings that says that feelings are learned by cultural system, and feelings condition our behavior. So my hypothesis is that after being POWs in France, they changed cultural concepts as the enemy, the concept of the enemy, the concept of their motherland and France, and they change the behavior. So emotion is a cultural construction that can be changed. Also, another key that I have is that I'm focusing in this intersection between private and public life of POWs. So the first thing is that for them to have this public life, to go on the streets every day, they have to swear by honor and think that honor it's a part of a feeling, it's a part of the private life, of the conceptions that are very inner and linked to the emotions for those prisoners of war on parole. Another thing that I take into account is their social origin. They were military engineers, so that meant that they belonged to a secondary nobility. They have a very good trainee, and they grew up having cultural feelings of their social status, as we will see with their religion, and they were considered themselves as aristocratic hierarchies, but as they had a very good trainee, they share the cultural principles, the scientific conceptions with those elitist intellectual elites of France. And as they were Catholic, also they considered these conceptions that they had clean of blood. It's a concept, limpieza de sangre, that we will see why is linked to this religious community, etc. Well, when they were in Spain in the war, there was the idea that French people were devil as Napoleon because they attacked churches. But what happened is that when those prisoners were led to France, they could go to the churches with the French people because because of this the alliance between Napoleon and the Pope for being an emperor allows the Catholic community to continue their practices, and José María Román reconstruct those practices, and also he goes to the church with their hosts, and we will see how he participates more with this Catholic community. He could reconstruct their origin, their religion, because he belonged to this Christian community, and he goes to churches as in Valladolid, where he born, and this church where he was baptized, or where he can go to the churches as those where he prayed in Alcalá de Henares. And also, as I was saying, he can reconstruct this Catholic community because they have the same roots. And because of that familiar sociability, because Jose Maria Roman lived at the house of Monsieur Blot in Nancy, he was the parentage of French young citizens as one doctor of Monsieur Blot, but in the diary he writes, this is my real, I'm a real parentage of two kids that he had before, because he was teaching them Latin and Greek, and he was his educator. And linked to this religious community, as I was saying, there is a very interesting point, is that he has the first contact with Jewish people. For having limpieza de sangre, the traditional nobility members had to show that they had no origins of Jewish people or more, and in Spain. But that made a big frontier, a cultural frontier that separate directly the Catholic group to the others. But Jose Maria Roman and their friends with the host, they give a very big step. Why? Because they want to know the other. They went to the synagogue in Nancy because it was a big community since the end of the 18th century of Jewish people in Nancy. And the common thing would be to have a censorship from the Catholic society to the Jewish group, Jewish people. But no, he goes to the neighborhood, he goes to a wedding, he went to many things that are showing that he was changing clearly that image of the other, of the enemy, and that secondary enemy of its religion. But finally, in the when we analyze the words he used, he has taboos and prejudices against the ways of doing the wreaths. But this is very typical in that period of war and afterward, and of prisoners, how Catholics or Protestants, etc. So these prejudices are very common in all Europe. The third and most important thing to create those links, to change this image of the enemy, is the sociability with citizens, which began there, living in the houses with those citizens, with their hosts. It's essential that they have a very good intellectual trainee to follow the modern principles of the intellectual elites. And there is something probably that was beyond the states. It's probably they were Freemason, Monsieur Blot for some indirect things. Maybe he was, but in any case, they shared the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. How they began to make those ties, because they went to a caserne at the beginning. As that group of intellectuals and engineers were very good trainees, had a very good trainee, they continue to make this training. So they went to the public library of Nancy. After the first days, they began to met the elites, the scientific elites, who, as Monsieur Blot, Lamoureux, some teachers and academics, they belong to the Royal Academy of Nancy. They began to make links and to say, you can come to my house. They show strong ties in the diary. And also they go together to see the museums. And what happened after the war? And after the defeat of Napoleon between 1818 and 1820, Jose Maria Roman, one of those prisoners, was admitted as a new member of the academy in Nancy as a corresponding member. That means that those strong ties that were made in the intellectual sphere and because of this initial sociability on the libraries, that made to continue after the situation of being prisoners. What's happening in the memories that we have? Nothing. The post doesn't exist. I mean, when we see, for example, in Zaragoza, when they ask for the crosses to be for being a hero as the Cruz de San Fernando, they didn't mention that they were for 4 years living on a city. No, they say, I was a prisoner in France. So to finish with my presentation, the conclusion is that emotional ties developed during the Napoleonic invasion of Spain were so strong that changed the concept of the enemy. I have regarded mostly to 3 aspects: as emotional friendship, as religious feelings and Catholic community, and the sociability relationships to change that image that we have of the prisoner. Why? Because it was hidden after Ferdinand VII take again the power, and he forbidden these people to even to become an engineer again. They were 2 years apart from the academic life of the Royal Academy of Engineers, and they have banned to speak about this situation. And even in 1908, when we see the memories of the heroes as they want to talk about this group of prisoners, for example, in Obelisco de Zaragoza, they hide always this situation of being prisoners that began in a caserne and finish in the houses of the French hosts. Thank you very much.